Children with emotional disability, also known as emotional disturbance, are significantly more likely than children with other disabilities to not be integrated into regular classrooms, to experience a disciplinary removal, and to drop out of school. Over the years, multiple social emotional learning, or SEL, interventions have been developed to support children with emotional disabilities. But New York City public schools found that one-size-fits-all programs were not sufficient for their student population. So the district created and began studying an educational pilot called the PATH program. At the heart of this program are occupational therapists and occupational therapy concepts. In today's episode, we'll look at research that describes the research-practice partnership that supported this program's development, and the role of trauma-informed care in social-emotional learning interventions. After we look at this research, we will welcome to the podcast Michelle Flemen-Tung, MSEd, the program director of the PATH program. She will share concrete ways we can all improve the support we provide to kids with emotional disabilities. So let's dive in. Welcome to the OT Potential Podcast, where we review new and influential OT journal articles, then invite on an expert guest to help us pull out actionable takeaways that you can implement in your practice starting today. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Lyon, and I am a licensed occupational therapist. Before we dive into emotional disability and OT, I wanted to let you know that this podcast may qualify as continuing education for you. You are probably listening to this podcast on a free podcast platform. But to gain CEU credit, you will need to be a member of the OT Potential Club, our OT continuing education platform. Bearing in mind that this could count as a CEU course, I wanted to state our 2 learning objectives so you can be thinking about them throughout the podcast today. Our first learning objective is you will be able to identify OT interventions that can be utilized with children with emotional disability. You will also be able to recognize how trauma-informed care can be integrated into OT interventions that can be utilized with children with emotional disability. So let's begin by looking at this journal article, and then we will bring on Michelle to discuss how this research could play out in your practice. The article that we are reviewing today is called Adapting SEL Interventions to Meet Student Needs, a research practice partnership supporting students with emotional disabilities. This article comes to us from Social and Emotional Learning, Research Practice and Policy, and it was published in the year 2024. So what is social emotional learning? Social emotional learning interventions encompass a wide variety of approaches. At the most basic level, SEL is a process of developing self-awareness, self-control, and interpersonal skills that are vital to a person's success in their school, work, and life. These interventions do seem to hold promise, as large-scale systematic reviews have found that SEL interventions had a small positive effect on reading, mathematics, and science skills when compared to traditional methods. SEL can also help lower emotional distress. But while there is promise in these SEL interventions, there are also problems. One-size-fits-all SEL programs may be less relevant for students of color, English language learners, and students with disabilities. I would also add that these one-size-fits-all interventions are also problematic from a neurodiversity affirming perspective. This is an issue that was well covered in a podcast on Learn, Play, Thrive, which I will link to in our show notes. So turning back to this article, they state that given emerging research, scholars and practitioners alike have argued that SEL must be applied in context in a way that is responsive to student needs, which leads us to the PATH program. This paper was written to describe the creation of an education intervention called the PATH program. New York City Public Schools developed the PATH program for students with emotional disabilities who are disproportionately Black, male, and low income. Here's how a press release described the program in 2022. The release said that core elements of the PATH program include a small class size, 2 full-time classroom teachers, in-class and out-of-class support from a social worker and occupational therapist, and collaborative partnership among families and school staff. PATH classrooms are grounded in principles of culturally responsive and strengths-based education and evidence-informed practices, including positive behavior and self-regulation support, social-emotional learning, and trauma-informed care. As I mentioned, the PATH program is supported by a research practice partnership with researchers and practitioners from New York University. So what was the intent of this specific paper? The intent of this article was to explain how this research practice partnership supports the adaptation and implementation of the PATH program. The program utilizes a continuous improvement model called Plan, Do, Study, Act. So headed into this description, let's look at how the PATH program is being implemented. Launched in 2021, the Research Practice Partnership was created to increase the district's support of students with emotional disabilities. At the time of this paper's publication, the program was up and running in 13 classrooms across 6 different elementary schools. Collaboration among teachers, occupational therapists, and social workers is key to this program's success. Teachers lead SEL strategies in the classroom, while OTs and social workers guide program implementation. OTs specialize in supporting students' regulation through classroom environmental design elements, class-wide regulation support, and individualized strategies like programs for students with sensory needs. The social workers in this program support students' emotional awareness, regulation, and expression through both whole class and individualized trauma-informed strategies and clinical services. So what does this Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle look like? Looking at the plan stage, the program decided to use both targeted and universal strategies. Core to the vision of the program are bite-sized SEL kernels that allow for flexible implementation. Ideally, these SEL kernels are low-cost, targeted, and evidence-based strategies. Staff are literally trained on a menu of these strategies so they can implement appropriate activities whenever they make sense, as opposed to using a set program in every situation. Activities were originally sourced from the Bounce Back program, specifically the program's body, feelings, and relaxation training. Trauma-informed care is also integrated into the PATH program. For example, students are not expected to self-regulate. Rather, the program is designed to provide adult support through co-regulation. So that's what it looked like in the planning stage. What did the do stage look like? The research team from NYU does not directly implement the PATH program in schools. Rather, they assist with training and ongoing consultation. Staff in the program participate in a multi-day pre-service training led by university practitioners and district leaders. So that's the do part of the cycle. What did the study part of the cycle look like? The researchers conducted monthly 60-minute classroom observations. They also administered an in-depth survey midway through the study. They also conducted brief surveys at the end of staff training. 2 areas of improvement were identified. First, school staff reported that they responded to frequent incidents of dysregulation, during which they did not feel confident supporting students. Second, the staff reported feeling burdened by program implementation. Given these findings, 2 courses of action were agreed on. The first was to teach staff more skills for both developing students' regulation and de-escalating situations when they arise. Second, they decided to streamline and align SEL activities with other district programs to make the implementation more feasible. So what did this look like in the ACT phase? 2 major changes were made to the program, which will be studied in upcoming cycles. The first was to help staff better support students during periods of dysregulation. To do this, they provided training on the therapeutic crisis intervention for schools. This is a program that I will link to in our show notes. And the other change that they made was the body feelings and relaxation training was substituted with zones of regulation, which had been used by the school previously, but only by the occupational therapy professionals. Because the occupational therapists were already familiar with this approach, they were able to help model it for teachers and assist in wider implementation. So that was their full cycle. What were the overall lessons from this PATH program? The authors state that with a strong body of evidence supporting impactful SEL activities, the field of SEL programming is now turning its focus to ensuring that student SEL needs are met in any given context. The PATH program's fusion of SEL with trauma-informed care helps address the need for context-adaptable programming. However, because no one had ever created a comprehensive intervention integrating SEL academic and behavioral supports for students with emotional disability in the general education classroom, insights from both researchers and practitioners in this study were critical to successful program implementation and adaptation. In short, the research-practice partnership allowed program leaders not only to imagine goals for students, but also to take the necessary iterative steps to achieve them. Okay, that wraps up our article review. I loved this article. I think in this article, you could just really feel the heart for helping these kids with emotional disabilities. And I love that the changes that they called out and worked on are just ones that we as practitioners can relate to. And I love how this gave us a sense of what evolving best practices can actually look like in the school setting. There is just so much to talk through in this paper. I think the implications are huge for school OTs, but also schools at large. And we have the perfect person here to talk through all of this with us, and that is Michelle Flemen-Tung, MSEd, the program director of the PATH program. Michelle's main focus of her work is facilitating inclusive practices with educators and administrators across New York City communities. She co-authored the program's proposal with Dorothy Siegel, founder of the ASD NEST program. Michelle is a licensed special educator, certified school building leader, and a graduate of NYU's Educational Leadership Program. Michelle has over 20 years of experience working in schools as a special education teacher and leader. So without further ado, I will patch Michelle into this podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Michelle. It's great to have you.
Hey, Sarah, how are you? I'm really thrilled to be here.
Oh, I am just so thankful you are here. I get to read a lot of OT-related journal articles, but this one hit me in such a unique way to the point where I have been on the phone with my local school OTs. I've been calling people I know that work at the school foundation, and I'm like, this is a program that we need to be paying attention to. It was developed in New York City. I live in rural Nebraska, but it still feels, even though New York feels far away to me, this feels like one of the most important things that my school in rural Nebraska could also be thinking about. So I'm just so excited to talk about the logistics of it. Before we get to those logistics, I just want to learn more about you and how you got here. So if you could tell us a little bit about how, I guess, the PATH program came to be and what your involvement was in that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a lifelong special educator. So I basically graduated with a degree in special education and left my graduation and registered within the public school system right away. So I have been in the classroom for quite some time. I worked as a special education teacher, a special ed coordinator. I worked doing a lot of training of other educators. But I think that one of the things that has always been like a real gift and a real privilege in my career is that I've always had amazing collaborators. I've always worked alongside incredible professionals who have really enriched the work that I was able to do in the classroom. And as I moved into more writing and consulting, I've really drawn from that collaborative experience and really knowing where my expertise begins and ends and really understanding that there's always folks around you in schools that also have a perspective that can enrich the work that you're doing and really allow kids to be more successful. So the PATH program is a New York City public school inclusion program. The original beginning started with Dorothy Siegel, who I'm so fortunate that I was able to have her as my mentor. She's a lifelong advocate for special education in New York City. She founded the NEST program. So the NEST program is a specialized program for students with autism. And I worked as a consultant for them and went out to schools and coached and trained and, started doing that work. And then in the beginning of 2020, New York Community Trust, which had approached Dorothy and asked her, do we want to take the success that has happened for students with autism and really think about another population of students and how we can apply those same inclusive practices to allow other populations of students to be successful. So it was beginning of 2020. She and I had a couple of lunches and a couple of chats about it. And she, quote unquote, asked me to collaborate on her little paper. That was 4 years ago. So, during that time, we had talked about how students with emotional disabilities are almost always a group of students that are least likely to be included in integrated settings. So, we did some research. We really thought about what are some things that students who have emotional disabilities need. And then the pandemic hit in the middle of that year. And I think that, we continued writing and we continued working on this blueprint throughout the pandemic. And it became more and more and more clear the inequities in education, how the experience of, in particular, Black and Brown students who already had a lot stacked against them in terms of chronic adversity, chronic stressors, how those challenges were exacerbated. And, in so many situations, how the pandemic really disproportionately impacted students of color in New York City and across the country, really. So students who are experiencing, loss of a parent, loss of a sibling, students who were separated from their family because of a lack of food insecurity and difficulty with housing, access to medical care, like all of those things just became clearer and clearer and clearer as the days went on. So the PATH program really was created with the backdrop of the pandemic behind us. And I think that, as I became more involved and as I, did this work to really take a really successful blueprint and then think about a different population of students, we really started to have more and more conversations about trauma, that it wasn't solely an emotional disability, that didn't really tell the whole story, but really most of the kids that we were looking at really designing this program for had also a significant history of trauma behind them. And that was really part of the reason why they weren't successful in schools, because there was so much in their history that was really keeping them from being able to access some of the same supports that that really worked well for other students. So it went from a little paper into this is really really the entire focus of my professional life and will be for the rest of my career.
The timing of everything strikes me, and especially in my conversations, I just hear anecdotally, since the pandemic, there's been just increasing difficulty integrating kids with emotional disabilities into the classroom. My guess is that would be that there was the emotional trauma of the pandemic just was one more layer that made everything
one more
harder.
layer. Yeah, precisely.
The timing of when you started it just stands out to me. That we're really fortunate that you started it when you did, and its importance just keeps increasing. One of the questions I wanted to ask off the top is about funding. Something that stood out to me was the high teacher-student ratio. I know in my small town, we have troubles getting teachers. Is that funding going to support actually having more staff, or is the funding going to the training? And where's that funding coming from?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really sort of like a well-balanced meal. I think that the funding really does go into a lot of the system-wide structures that allow the program to be successful. So, for example, a social worker full-time, an occupational therapist full-time, part-time, or full-time, the ratio of the classroom being a little bit smaller. So, somewhere between 12 and 16 students total in the class. And then 4 students who are identified with having an IEP that relates to an emotional disability. The funding, I think in so many ways, the timing really was everything. I think that a lot of the funds that were released through the federal government into the states, into the cities, really helped us with those early startup, the funding that really allowed that beginning to kind of take hold. Obviously, we work really closely on New York University, as well as New York City Public Schools work hand in hand. We're so fortunate because we do have a robust team at New York City Public Schools that really advocates for the funding for the program. And I think that is, just speaks to how important inclusion is to New York City Public Schools and how important it is to sort of rewrite a history of segregation in the school system. And we also really have been very blessed in that we've had two pretty significant grants. One that allowed us to create the elementary pilot, and then one this past year to expand the program into middle schools. And then we also have written additional research grants. So we recently received an IES grant, which is an innovation and education grant from the U.S. Department of Education. So we're going to be watching the election very carefully, but we are definitely, really have been so fortunate because we've had multiple sources of funding. But I think that what we need to do is really continually, never become complacent, but continually look at, where's the next movement that our program needs? Where is that funding going to come from? We have a research team that works with us that I think doing a phenomenal job, really anticipating what are the needs of the program and how can we, seek out different ways. But New York City Public Schools, I can't say enough. They've been an incredible partner in this work.
Yeah, that the timing of the funding feels so important with what became available after the pandemic, but it also feels like the timing is still right. I feel like when I talk to my friend who works at a foundation, this is a top priority for them, serving kids with emotional disabilities.
Sure.
That the timing, for anyone who's listening, keep having those conversations with any potential funding source, because I do think the timing is still right to open up funds to start a program like this. We're going to talk a lot about the logistics of this program, but I wanted to ask you on a personal level, as I read this paper and associated papers, they're emotional. There's stories of kids who are struggling, and hopefully there's a transformation. And I can't help but ask just how personally this has impacted you as a professional. Now hearing your timeline, that's a lot in 4 years for you to do. What has that just meant for you personally, this work?
I think it really has really changed, dramatically shifted the direction of my career. I think that as, I've been a classroom teacher for a really long time and have worked with so many kids who fall into this category where they're, students who really challenge the adults around them and then through no fault of their own are really left behind and really are pushed out of school settings, pushed out of opportunities for them to be successful. In my own personal life, I grew up in a family where, around and there was so many stories of trauma and challenge and adversity. And I think that when you grow up in that and you really understand that really at the end of the day, the only thing that works in terms of kids healing is being surrounded by a village that really believes in them, that really shows up and is willing to see past challenges and really love them back into life. And I think that that's something that from my own upbringing, my parents cared for many other kids outside of our family. And I think, I always understood that if there is that opportunity to really see past kids' challenges and really understand that there's more underneath, right? That some of the behaviors that you see are really just a mode of communication. And if you can get under all of that, then you can really build a relationship with kids. They feel a sense of felt safety and trust, and then kids really start to soar. And I think that, kids who have experienced trauma, their strengths and their capacities and their resilience is forged in fire. So in some ways, if you can get past those challenges, you're going to look at a child that has tremendous capabilities, and their potential is limitless. But it's about really helping the adults around them to persevere and hang in there and move past the challenges and understand that it's a long-term relationship that you're building with a child in order to get to the other side, to get to the place where they are really able to reach and often exceed their potential.
I know that will resonate so much with OT professionals. So often we want to be a part of that collaborative village.
Yes.
But we feel like we're set up to pull the kids out and just not be as coordinated, not be on the same page as we want to be, but we don't have the structural support to do that. I think that's true in a lot of OT settings, but I think we especially feel that in the school. And I think that's what makes this program so remarkable. It gives us the opportunity to do what we've been craving to do as OTs, to really have that coordinated approach and care for kids. This paper came out was written a couple of years ago. It was focused on the research practice partnership. I loved seeing how just the path for it to be updated. I wanted to hear if you had either any reflections on the paper or updates on what you've learned since. One of my questions is just do you feel like the program has continued to be successful in helping kids?
Yeah. Well, I think, the success can only be measured by, how many kids have been able to be successful, how many kids have been able to remain in the program. And I think that, we have seen students who were well on their way to much more restrictive settings, day treatment programs, District 75, alternative school settings. We've seen so many students that have, at a very young age, we've been able to sort of turn that trajectory around. And I think that is really speaks to, that's how I measure the success of the program. And certainly our team together measures it because the proof's in the pudding, right? If kids are doing well and if kids are thriving, that's where the success is. And I think that we, are still trying to figure out, when students are not successful, how do we support the adults around them in order to give them the skills and the strategies that they need for them to feel successful? Because I think if the adults feel confident, feel like they have a sense of self-efficacy, it really does change the trajectory for students. So I think that we've learned a lot about how to balance research and practice and how to really take what is out there in terms of trauma-informed research and really make it bite-sized and actionable in schools. I think we've done a tremendous amount of listening, really listening, focus groups, feedback, surveys, really understanding the experience of the professionals. Because at the end of the day, if they do not feel confident, if they do not feel secure and safe themselves, it's really hard for them to create that environment of felt safety for students. So I think that has been really impactful. And I think that OTs have brought so much to this work, so much to this work when it comes to understanding the role of regulation and really understanding the dance of co-regulation, right? Like really helping adults to begin with their own sense of regulation and then to be able to support students. Like that idea of putting on your oxygen mask first so that you can support a child in front of you rings true 100%. And I think when we're thinking about situations where students, really have challenges with regulating their emotions and have these big reactions, and really tapping into the expertise of OTs to really understand like what's happening inside, like what are some skills of interoception that we really need to start building when kids are really small? How do we start to link the brain and the body? How do we really think about physical regulation in this big picture? Because trauma lives in the body. So I think, we have learned so much. And I think we've learned so much by constantly being in collaboration and constantly sort of putting ego aside. And, no one on our team really has to be the smartest person in the room. Like, I think all of us really try to model on a very high level that interdisciplinary humility that is required in order to do this work.
How did this happen where OTs are such an integral part of this team? And I feel like so many occupational therapy concepts are interwoven. I think, to be honest, as OTs, we are accustomed to feeling like we're doing like something secondary outside the classroom, not feeling well understood and wanting to be collaborators, but
Sure.
having troubles with that.
Yes.
How did this come to be?
I think because the needs of students who have experienced chronic stress, trauma, adversity, systems involved families, I think that the needs are so complex that it really outpaces any one professional's skill set. And I think OTs, this misconception that OTs are there simply for fine motor is something that, that went out the window almost immediately because our kids did need so much. I mean, trauma lives in the body. So really understanding that connection between stress responses and what's physically happening for our kids was apparent from day one, right from the start. And I think that oftentimes when we looked at why are kids not successful in inclusive classrooms, oftentimes it was a skill deficit. It really, the desire, everybody wants to be successful in their community. Everybody wants to feel like they belong, like they are capable of belonging in a community. But oftentimes there was this mismatch that happened with our kids in terms of, other kids around them or other young people around them as they're moving into middle school have just a better sense of awareness about what's happening inside of them and how they can really respond. And I think that, as we started looking at therapeutic models and started working really closely with our clinical team, one of the things that we realized is that we needed a much more robust set of skills for our kids to develop over time. And really, OTs carry that expertise. And I think that in order for us to really be thorough and empower kids to really develop the skills over time to start understanding where do those stress responses begin and end, we needed the voice of OTs. And we've been really fortunate in that we've partnered with some incredible occupational therapists along the way. Dora Amore, which I know you have had a chance to have her on the podcast before. Darnell Young, who's the director of occupational therapy in New York City. And I think that, their team has really helped to shape the program and think about, what are some of the conditions that we need in the environment? What are the conditions that we need for the students in our program? But also, how are we building a trauma-informed environment for everyone in the school? Because I think that the thing about trauma is you can't really put it in a box. You can't really only build it out in one space, in one area. You really have to think much more broadly and holistically so that if everyone is well, then our kids do better. And I think that, we've learned so much about adult regulation and how that plays a part and how, that those mirror neurons really take over oftentimes when adults feel unsafe and feel like they're not supported. And I think that, OTs have really led the way in our work in making that happen.
Yeah, as OTs, we so want those opportunities to talk about interoception, the importance of the environment, the collaboration. And I'm so thankful that there is this opportunity in this program, and to get to see it lived out. I think sometimes we have this ideas of like, what could this, like we see in our mind's eye what that collaboration could look like, but we don't get to actually see it. And we see what kids are missing because of that. And we know that our individual efforts are not enough. And so it's so hard to work in settings where we don't get that, where it feels like there's not that opportunity for collaboration. I have multiple questions about the logistics of the program, but I think just big picture for OTs who are not in New York City public schools.
Yep.
What do you want them to take away from this program?
So I would say really a sense of confidence in your own expertise. I think that is sort of foundational to being a collaborator. I think oftentimes what we heard in the very beginning is that OTs had a lot of hesitation around feeling like I'm stepping on the teacher's toes, or feeling a sense of hesitation for really speaking up for kids on behalf of what their regulation needs were. And I think that, really being brave and building relationships with other professionals who are on the same page, building relationships with professionals who are curious, right? Like, I think that there is a whole range of teachers and social workers and administrators that see the need for increased support for regulation in the classroom and across schools, but they don't quite know how to put words to that, put strategies to that. So I think, really finding your allies, I think is a good place to start. Like, really, in particular, I know that, special educators who, are working in inclusive settings already, really there are some structures set up in those environments that there is room for OTs, like the way that they're approaching teaching in small groups and in stations. Like, really, I think, having the ability to utilize those structures as places where you can insert your own expertise. And, hey, I have this idea for doing some morning yoga, or doing a movement activity, or to cool down after recess. I think just, being really brave and starting small and finding who are your allies in your school community and building in small practices that then turn into other folks around in your school environment becoming really curious. And, it seems like that's really working. Maybe I can try that in my classroom. Like, I think, sort of like getting out of your own way. And, so often as professionals, we're sort of afraid to encroach on others' expertise. But, OTs have so much power that is not really utilized in schools, and can be so much more transformational for kids and young people. So I think, sharing some ideas and really not being intimidated by just trying some things out. We have an OT in our middle school pilot that this year, one of the things that she's involved in is morning arrival. So kids were coming to school super dysregulated. I mean, after 2 bags of Takis and a big old juice from the store, like, really starting out the day behind the 8 ball in terms of being ready to learn. And this occupational therapist, her name is Noelle Lopopolo. This was her very first year in a school, and she had actually come from a hospital. She'd come from a much more clinical setting, and started to recognize, like, we have to start their days differently. We have to think about changing the way that kids are ready in the beginning of the day to receive learning, to connect with their peers. And she approached the AP and had some ideas for how morning arrival could look. and how, really setting the stage for a much more soothing, calming start to the day made all the difference, but not just for students in our program, but for all students in that sixth grade. So I think, like trying some things out and being brave, I think really will get you further than you think.
I've done 85 podcasts, and all of my guests thus far have been OTs. And I've been so looking forward to having you on, because I'm like, what you just said, I think is exactly what we need to hear. I think too often we're in our own ways, and have the opportunity to step up with this needed skill set with more confidence, more bravery, to know that we're bringing such a valuable lens to the team. And I just so appreciate hearing that from you. I wanted to ask also about trauma-informed care.
Yep.
I was reading a paper before this, and what I read was 50% of U.S. students have had trauma experiences that are interfering with their learning.
Sure.
I had never heard that statistic before, so it hit me. I can also see the reality of that, though. What have you learned about trauma-informed care that you want OTs from across the country to be taking into their schools?
Mm-hmm. I think first and foremost is really viewing behavior as a mode of communication. I think when kids have such varied responses to stressful and traumatic experiences. And I think, really starting to be very observant and stepping back and looking at, what is it that students are really communicating by behaviors that adults find challenging to manage, disruptive, really, I know it's really cliched, but really looking underneath the iceberg and really trying to dig down into what skills are missing, what is this young person or child's history been, and how does that relate to the reactions and responses that we're seeing. I think also, occupational therapists to think about how trauma-informed practices can't live in isolation. They really need to be school-wide, and there really needs to be much deeper understanding. And I think the place where there's a big deficit in terms of understanding is really the connection between the body and the brain, and really helping not just kids, but the adults in your school community to understand how, if you physically are not able to really manage your responses, then there's lots that we can do to really support you with that. Alerting, calming, there's so many things that can happen that aren't super expensive, that aren't that difficult to provide. I think that, we've done a lot with, calm corners in our schools, but we've also, we work really closely with Cynthia Boone. She's one of the OT directors that works on that program, and she's always advocating for peaceful places. It's not just one spot that you go to, because you need access to those strategies and tools all the time. So what are some things that we can think about across the school environment so that kids have lots of options, and when they feel unsafe and when they feel dysregulated, that they have different adults in their community who have a little bit of awareness, who keep a couple of things in their drawer, so that when kids are really struggling, that there's this safety net kind of built around them in their community. And I think that's when we really see kids start to be successful, because trauma is just so complex, and kids connect with different adults for different reasons. And I think the more wide of a repertoire kids have in terms of accessing adults who will support them and will care for them and will believe in them and have a relationship with them, I think the better off they are. Because working with kids who have this background, it's tiring, it's draining. So I think if you build up an army of adults around kids, they're much more likely to be successful, because then when one adult sort of needs to tag out and needs to bring someone else into that equation, I think that, that becomes the culture of the building. It's not something that, I have to just muscle through it and push through, even though I am feeling like I've reached the end of that my tank is empty, right? So I think, OTs have such a powerful voice in the adults understanding that dance that happens.
My impression is what could happen if you're really working individualistically, that you can see that trauma that's being brought in and be like, that the time I get with them is so limited. It doesn't feel like enough to counter that. And it's not as one individual. I think that coordinated team, that's where that coordinated team is so important and needed.
Yeah. And I think sharing your expertise and constantly thinking about how are you expanding your reach? How are you, because 20 minutes or 30 minutes, a couple times a week individually with kids, it's a start. It's certainly a start, but it's hard to predict when kids need support. So really, the more that you're building in those opportunities for collaborating with other professionals and sharing what they know, what you know, and then really coming together and figuring out what's the toolbox that this child needs all day long, and how can you take a part and I take a part so that it's able to be this like steady diet rather than these like more intensive pockets.
The article talked about basically this menu of kernel-sized SEL activities. I know OTs are going to read this paper and be like, what was that menu? What do I need to know from that menu? What can you tell us about that? Can we see it? Are there things you would recommend to us?
Sure. Definitely. So for professionals that are coming into the program for the first time, there is a pre-service training that happens. And I think that, really understanding trauma and understanding trauma impacts and the range of trauma impacts is something that is really helpful. There is so much more information out there about trauma-informed education practices. And I think even though those are not written specifically for OTs, there's still a lot of information that you can take out of that will inform your work. And I know in preparation for this interview, I was trying to really think about like what are some bite-sized resources that could be helpful for OTs specifically. And there's actually a book called Connections Over Compliance that really is one of those practice research texts that is really unpacks like what trauma can look like for different kids and how you can respond to it. There's plenty of neuroscience in there for those of us that really love some good educational neuroscience. It has a lot of great ideas. Dr. Lori Desautels, her work is throughout, and it's really making educational neuroscience more accessible to professionals in the field. And I think that that's certainly a good text to start with. I mean, another thing for OTs to really look at is really looking at trauma-informed behavioral strategies. So really thinking about unpacking, what has to happen preventatively before kids have these big reactions and big responses or shut down, right? Like what are some things that can happen that is sort of like this slow, measured, ongoing support for students that prevents them from getting ever to the place where these big blowups happen. I would also say that really when you're thinking about trauma-informed behavioral responses, really thinking about adult regulation in the moment. That is above and beyond. Like you really can't control what is going to happen in terms of a reaction with student. You can prevent as much as you can, but sometimes some of the reactions that kids are having isn't something you can see, right? They're responding to, the sound of an adult that they had experienced, that you can't really make that connection. You can't predict everything, but if you can, in those moments when kids are really struggling, continually think about your own regulation. How can I support myself? How can I engage in self-talk? How can I think about stretching. Even maybe I can't move away from this child, but maybe I can really stretch, or I can really breathe, or I can really remind myself that this moment that's happening that's really hard right now is temporary, right? And I'm going to get to the other side, and the child's going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. I think that those are all strategies that can be helpful. I think also thinking about really creating very intentional structures for understanding students, what make them successful and what to avoid with students also can be really helpful. I think sometimes there's an incredible amount of information that's gathered about kids, but then as adults are working with them, you need to continually refresh your understanding of kids and what makes them successful, what makes them work, and what, less so, right? So I think, really thinking about partnering with other professionals, partnering with social workers, and engaging in conversations with families, and really, knowing kids well is oftentimes so much more successful than any strategy that's going to come out of the box, right? That's just the way that that humans operate, right? We're all so unique and individual.
Yeah. Yeah, lots of times our programs are set up to just help us understand those unique differences, unique strengths. They're just a format to do that. In this paper, they talked about zones of regulation and the therapeutic crisis intervention. Mm-hmm. Is that still centered in the work? And are there other programs you're looking and thinking about? Like, I just covered the interoception curriculum, and I'm like, that feels like that would fit really well with what you're doing.
Yeah. And part of the reason why we utilize no one structure or approach is perfect, right? But I think that what we found is that, zones of regulation was something that was bite-sized enough that both teachers and OTs and social workers could all sort of get on the same page. Like there was enough accessibility there that you didn't need to have super specific skill set in order to be able to implement. So that's certainly been something that we've found that's been successful. And it really speaks to that interception piece of, kids having some language for being able to express when they are feeling certain ways in terms of their emotional experience, but also physical experience. So that's definitely something we found that's been helpful. But really, I think when we are, thinking about approaches, really having a good understanding across the year of different experiences that kids will naturally have in school that, can be more challenging for them. So really thinking about the beginning of the year and thinking about, transitions and relationship building at the start, really thinking about certain times of the year that are less structured and more challenging for kids to adapt to, things like vacations and breaks and picture day and, things like that, like really thinking through what are some things we can do to really support kids before it happens so that they are more successful. TCIS has been incredibly helpful when it comes to thinking about those in the moment strategies, right? TCIS has a very important place in the program because it gives adults a structure. It gives them a step by step that, when a child is responding in this way, this is how I am going to approach it. This is how I'm going to debrief afterward. And I think, some of the things that comes out of TCIS is this like debriefing process with kids after the fact, so that when things have happened that we kind of wish hadn't happened, we have an opportunity and we have the language and the steps to really unpack it with kids, unpack it with other adults, and really think about how can we prevent this next time? How can we avoid this situation happening over and over again? And what are some skills that kids are missing, that we can really think about? And OTs are perfectly positioned to be a part of those conversations and really thinking about what are some places that we can really help kids with some coping strategies that will help them to feel more successful.
Yeah, taking those programs that we're familiar with and then individualizing them and contextualizing, that is exactly what OTs want to be doing. We also want to be working collaboratively. I want to ask two kind of big questions, but I want to ask them together because they go hand in hand. These are my last two big questions.
Yeah.
If an OT is listening to this and they're like, I want to bring something like this to my school. The first question I want to ask you is, I can tell that you are just an amazing collaborator. Like you, I feel like can articulate OT better than I can. How do we have those conversations with our allies in the school about thinking about something programmatically? That's one part of the question. The second part is, I want to say, can we just copy the PATH program? Like, what elements can we take from it? I don't think NYU is going to come help me in Aurora, but like, how do we have the conversations, and what resources are there for us to just draw from? Maybe not copy, but draw from and contextualize to our own settings.
Right. I think every professional who is motivated to work with kids is ready to center kids in conversations. So I think that's always a good place to start. Like, hey, I noticed this particular child is struggling with A, B, or C. Are there some things that we can think about to support them and so that we can feel more successful? I think that oftentimes when we approach it with the child at the center, there's much more of openness to that collaboration. Where I think if we come at it from a perspective of your skill set is different from my skill set, so I have to help you or I have to train you, I think that's where, things get lost in translation, and then all the adults have hard feelings about things, and then we kind of don't get anywhere. So I would say really centering kids in conversations, really having some very, clear conversations about like, when do we notice that this child is successful? When do we notice that they're less successful? What are some barriers that are in the way? And what can I contribute to that? What can you contribute to that so that we're all more successful? I have, long before the PATH program and the NEST program was a part of my life, even as a classroom teacher, I think that OTs that really taught me so much were OTs that were able to help build my understanding and my knowledge, who came into situations and were able to say, hey, this is a child who it seems like this is really tricky or hard for this student and for you. Here's some things that we can try that might make it less so. And I think that, everybody wants to feel successful as a professional. And I think when we feel stuck with kids, having someone reach out a hand and say, hey, I have some ideas, you want to try some things together and we'll see what works. I think that it really opens up the door. Once you have one successful collaboration, that then leads to other successful collaborations. And then that leads to you looking for more opportunities to share expertise and collaborate. But I think really starting with kids and kids you care about, kids that you really understand well, know well, and want to help them be more successful in their classrooms and throughout the day. And I think, that usually folks are much more open to wanting to help kids be more successful. The other thing that I would say is really thinking about really pairing your knowledge with some of the contexts of the classroom. I think that occupational therapists, because there's been so much separation in terms of OTs treating kids outside of the classroom, I think that there's so much hesitation and hesitation with being a part of the classroom community, like really pushing yourselves to like become a part of activities that are happening in the classroom. I think that that's definitely a place that OTs can gain some traction in terms of collaborating with other professionals in your school. I think, sometimes it's safer for you to stay in your therapeutic space, whatever that may be, because it feels like you don't have to really communicate as much, really problem solve as much, really find your way to the middle. But I think that, in the middle is where the magic is when we're thinking about making kids successful. So, joining or offering to join things that are happening in the classroom, offering to come in and take a look and see what, students that are on your caseload, go and take a look. Like, what are some things that you see that are happening in their day that need your support? And I think that you'll be surprised with how open adults are when you are helping them solve problems, right? When you're helping them to really allow things to run more smoothly in their classroom environment. And there's so much for kids that OTs can bring that will allow them to be more successful in those academic and social spaces in school.
If I say I'm a school OT, I want to go get a grant to do something similar to the PATH program, what can we draw on from you? Like, is more coming that will be published that will make it even more concrete to see the steps that you've taken to do this?
Yes, definitely.
Can we do similar trainings? What is there more in-depth information out there than was shared in this paper?
Yes, most certainly. And I think that, we are, as a research practice partnership team are publishing all the time. And that is something that we are, constantly working on. We're developing out a public website so that there is more information more readily available for anyone who's interested in engaging in this kind of work. And I think that, we're also going to this year for the first time. I am not a huge social media person, but thankfully I am blessed by amazing teammates that are brave enough to dip a toe into that world. The PATH program hopes to really start, really putting some more information out there in that space. I think that, we don't want for PATH to just exist within New York City public schools. Our hope is to really grow and expand and really allow this work to live in other places. And, if it can be successful in a really complex school system, it can certainly be successful in other places. So that is our hope. That is our goal, to really continue to grow that and really grow a community of folks who are doing the same work other places. When we first began this work with New York City Public Schools, we had to look at other models, other trauma-informed models, and we actually worked really closely in collaboration with the public schools in New Orleans, so that when they were doing work, after the hurricane there, they did so much with thinking about school-based trauma-informed practice. And, we learned a lot from that. There was a researcher there by the name of Courtney Baker, and she recently partnered with an educator, Arlen Casimir, and they wrote a really bite-sized book about trauma-informed pedagogy. And I think that's a really bite-sized place to start. It's like a booklet. And I think that anyone can really access that information and get started in this work. The National Childhood Traumatic Stress Network is also a really great resource, and those resources are free. And that's all researchers and practitioners from across the country that are engaging in this work. And there's lots of great places to start, lots of great articles and frameworks and things that can get you started on this journey.
I look at what's being taught in this program, these trauma-informed approaches, the co-regulation, interoception, just everything we've talked about, and seeing how this serves the kids with emotional disabilities, but also just lifts everyone in the school up, from the other students to the teachers to everyone on staff. I hope every school foundation around the country takes a look at programs like this. Like, I think this is the program that every single school needs. This has felt really important and really helpful. And we've talked about so many things. What's the final thought that you want to leave us on today?
I would say start small, but start. I think this work feels so insurmountable. It feels like there's so many kids who have so many needs, but I think that, even if you just make one step or have one conversation with a colleague, or you as an occupational therapist, just, have coffee with the social worker in your school and, see what information you both have that you can bring to the table, and, really start thinking about how to center kids and really get this work to happen. It really felt impossible to think about building but somehow when you start doing this work, there's so many other people who carry these kids in their hearts as well. And then you start to bump into other people who are, really doing this work and really are passionate and care about the work. And I think that, if you start small and you're really brave and you just take one step towards getting this work off the ground, I think that you really start to find your own village in doing this work.
Yeah, and 4 years is just, I keep going back to that timeline of how, I've never seen a program that just does not feel like that much time for a program to take hold. But I think that speaks to how important this program is, how needed it was, how many resources were out there for you to draw on. And I just see how the person who invited you to work on this small paper, I think she saw in you, or you embody what this program is about, that collaborative spirit. And I'm so thankful that you were here to share with us today. I know we'll all have a lot to chew on, and I'm just so thankful for your work and what you've shared.
Yeah. One of my direct partners in New York City Public Schools, her name is Dr. Jennifer Dolan. She and I talk about all the time that it's a wild ride, but it's really worth it. And I think, if you can hear that, it is, there's a lot to this work, but that it is always, always, always worth it.
Well, thank you, Michelle. Wow, you all, this honestly feels like one of the most important topics that we have ever covered on this podcast. I truly believe that programs like this are the absolute best investment that our schools can make. As OT professionals, we know that to truly provide support in complex and difficult situations, a holistic and comprehensive approach is needed. And the PATH program has given us a blueprint for what this can look like. I hope this is a conversation that you share with fellow OTs, our school colleagues, and with concerned parents. And as always, I want to hear what your thoughts are about this conversation. If you are a casual listener, we would love a review from you. You can now review us on Google from our homepage, and we always appreciate your comments on our YouTube video. But the best place to really discuss the implications of this is in the OT Potential Club. I'll be watching for your comments in our forum. The OT Potential Club is also where you will go to earn a CEU certificate for your time today. So what you are going to do next is head to otpotential.com, where you can either sign in or sign up for the OT Potential Club. And once you are in there, you can take a 5-question test. And when you pass, we will generate a certificate for your time. Okay, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I hope this podcast helps keep you informed and inspired as an OT professional. Take care, and we'll talk next time.